What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one I'm going to go over the Week 11 waiver wire targets. We actually had quite a bit move around this week. I think there's actually a pretty good list here. No major season-ending injuries or anything, so there's nobody that's going to be worth like a full fab dump or anything like that. But we're sort of at the point in the season where it's pretty rare that you see those kinds of things. But I think there are a lot of really great one-week rentals available, some potentially valuable assets going down the stretch, and guys that I think can really help boost our rosters come playoffs. Before we get started, I just want to take my victory lap here. I'm Broncos fan. On the start sit video, I told everyone the Broncos were going to win today, and they did. So it's super exciting. Really happy about that. And just don't look now, but they're 4-5. They've got a shot to make the playoffs. So we'll see what happens there. But super excited. Really fun week. Finally got off my losing streak in the subscriber league as well. So should go week all around. Hopefully you guys are in good spots, and let's hope to make your rosters better going forward and get you guys rolling into those playoffs and get you guys some championships. So yeah, with that, let's just get into the quarterbacks here. So starting things off with the quarterbacks, not a whole lot in terms of players that I think are really great streaming options this week. We're getting a lot of quarterbacks back off of bye, so I think there are obviously a lot of players that are going to be available and can really help you guys out. But some guys that are very available on waivers. I'll start things off with Joshua Dobbs. He looked really good this last week against the Saints. Obviously didn't do much in the second half because they got up 24 at halftime. Didn't need to do a whole lot, just sort of leaned on their run game and held on. And I think that's sort of going to be the recipe going forward. They've got a decent matchup against the Denver Broncos this next week, along with the return of Justin Jefferson. This offense should be able to take a step forward even beyond what they did this last week. Obviously, the Broncos defense is a little bit better than what it was early on in the season. Those early matchups against the Commanders and then obviously the Dolphins are sort of skewing what their season-long statistics look like. But I think there's still a decent matchup. You can still score on them. You can still get a lot of yardage on them. And Dobbs obviously offers a really nice rushing floor with just how much he's rushing, how well he's scrambling, and with those weapons, with healthy Justin Jefferson, with Addison and Hawkinson, along with the fact that Alexander Madison got banged up with a concussion this last week, likely it won't suit up this week. I mean, they're not really going to have much of a running game. We'll touch on that situation later on in the video as well. But I think they're going to have to lean on Joshua Dobbs quite a bit, and their defense isn't good enough to like get them into these like low scoring games. Obviously the Broncos aren't like an elite offense by any means, so it'll probably be like a middle like a 20-20 sort of game next week. So not anything that's going to be super crazy, but this offense is going to need to score enough that I think Joshua Dobbs is going to be a really solid streaming option, and honestly might just finish the season as a fringe top 10 guy. After that, one of my favorite streamers to talk about this week is going to be Matthew Stafford. It's a little bit risky with him coming off of the injury, but sounds like he'll be good to go off the bye. They play the Seattle Seahawks, who, if you remember week 1, they really just couldn't defend the Rams at all. Obviously, the Rams had, I believe, 4 rushing touchdowns. I think Akers and Kyren Williams each had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. So the touchdowns didn't exactly go Stafford's way, but obviously there's a very different running back room in Los Angeles right now with Kyren Williams still going to miss one more game before he comes back off of IR. Stafford, Puka, and Cooper Kupp could easily just have a monster game against the Seahawks secondary that really hasn't been all that great. I know they won this last week and kind of did to keep Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson down, but they let both running backs just catch a ton of passes. Gave it up to Sam Howell as well. I think that in general the Seahawks defense can get passed on, and Stafford's got the weapons to do it, so Stafford would be a really great streaming option. And I'm talking about Russell Wilson as well. He's a roster in about half of leagues right now, but he's actually just been really solid so far this season. He's offering a decent rushing floor, giving you like the 20 to 30 rushing yards per game. He's throwing a lot of touchdowns. He's thrown 18 touchdowns in the season already more than what he threw all of last season. Sutton looks really good in the red zone. He's very clearly the guy that they're looking to when they get down there, and they just really aren't running the ball when they get near the red zone either. So this is a team that wants to throw those touchdowns in. Russ is playing really well. The Vikings defense is not a defense that scares you by any means, and we've seen Russ be a high-end performer in fantasy before, and I don't see any reason for touchdown regression to really come his way because outside of last year, he's always been an extremely efficient thrower of the ball, someone that always had an above average touchdown rate. I think he can just continue doing that. So Russ, I think it's going to be like a low end quarterback one the rest of the season. If he's on waivers and you're hurting at the quarterback position, you can definitely talk about him. Guys that I didn't list here because they're mostly rostered, I'll just bring them up real quick. Dak Prescott, he's been balling out lately. He's probably rostered in your league, but their schedule is really nice going forward as well. He looks really good. They really can't run the ball as effectively as they want to either, and they don't seem to mind just running up the score by throwing the ball. So Prescott needs to be rostered. And then Kyler Murray looked good in his first week back. If for whatever reason he ended up not getting picked up last week, he does need to be rostered in 100% of leagues at this point. Next up, we got the running back list. I think there's actually a lot of guys here that I want to talk about. I'll start things off with Keaton Mitchell, who did make the list last week, and again, performed at a really high level this last week. Obviously, very limited touches, but we saw how explosive he was. He had another 35-plus yard rushing touchdown, had a 30-plus yard catch as well. The touches are going to be limited for him, but I really do think it makes a lot of sense for the Ravens just to get him the ball over Justice Hill. I see a world where this ends up being a two-man backfield between Keaton Mitchell and Gus Edwards. Mitchell obviously being the guy that's they're using in the pass catching game, using like third downs, and obviously the guy that probably use between the 20s a little bit more. Gus Edwards is going to be the short yardage back and the goal line back, so the touchdown upside really isn't necessarily there for Keaton Mitchell, but I think there are a lot of comps for Keaton Mitchell to a guy like Devon Achane. Obviously, I'm not going to say he's as good as Achane just yet after 1 or 2 good games, but Keaton Mitchell looks really explosive. He's a guy that I definitely want to have on my roster, and I don't necessarily trust him just yet. The snaps didn't really look extremely favorable for him this last week, but I think sooner or later he's going to play his way into this being a two-man backfield, and after that happens, you're going to want to be playing Keaton Mitchell every week going forward. After that, I want to talk about Ty Chandler. I think Chandler's a really solid 1 week streamer here. Alexander Madison got banged up with a concussion this last week. We've seen so far this season that players that do get concussions have a really hard time clearing concussion protocol before the next week. The Vikings already went and added Myles Gaskin back to their roster. This is going to be a backfield probably led by Ty Chandler in week 11. Obviously, we haven't seen a whole lot of Ty Chandler. I don't think he's in a very elite NFL running back by any means, but he's got speed, he's got some juice. I think he's obviously got a chance to break off a big play or two, and this Broncos run defense really hasn't been great all season. Even this last night against the Buffalo Bills, we saw James Cook rush for over 100 yards against them, so I think Chandler's got a good shot to have a good game, probably get used in the passing game as well. I think he's a guy that I'd definitely be comfortable picking up right off of waivers and playing as like a low-end running back 2 this week. Devin Singletary, I'll mention him because he potentially got dropped for sort of putting up a dud in week 9. In week 10, he had 30 carries for 150 yards, looked really good. There's a chance as well that we potentially see Dameon Pierce missed this game again, and if that were to happen, it's a really plus matchup for Devin Singletary this next week. Devin Singletary would be in line for a massive workload again, and against a really plus matchup, so I'd certainly be looking to start Devin Singletary if Dameon Pierce happens to miss this game, and even if Dameon Pierce doesn't miss this game, Singletary may have played his way into just being like a 50-50, if not more, running back for this team. He's a talented player. I've liked him ever since he was in Buffalo, and he's definitely a guy, and how high octane this offense could easily be a running back 2 the rest of the season. Ezekiel Elliott, I'll mention him as well. He actually looked really good this last week. I know the Patriots only scored 6 points. Obviously, this is not an offense that we want a whole lot of pieces in, but I think their 2 best fantasy assets, or maybe 3 fantasy assets really, are the 2 running backs and then Demario Douglas. Ezekiel Elliott's clearly a guy that they want to get involved. Ramondre Stevenson is the guy that they're throwing the ball to, but Zeke looks good. He looks more explosive than he's looked over the last few years, and he's a running back that's getting touches, even though it's in a bad offense. He's a guy that I think does need to be on rosters and could certainly be played if you're in a pinch as like a desperation running back 2, a guy that you're hoping falls in the end zone. Tajay Spears I'll bring up. Derrick Henry had another down game here. He's a guy that obviously gets utilized in the passing game if this team falls behind. He's a talented player. If anything were to ever happen to Derrick Henry, he'd be in a massive workload, so he's a great handcuff to be rostering. Zach Charbonnet, again, played well this last week, actually caught a few passes, had a little bit of fantasy success, about 10 PPR fantasy points. Nothing to write home about necessarily, but it was nice to see him put up a little bit of production. Had a bit of a boneheaded play at the end of the game where he didn't get out of bounds, so I'm sure he didn't earn a whole lot of favor with the coaching staff with that, but he's clearly a guy that they trust in pass protection and pass catching, and we've seen that. Honestly, Kenneth Walker hasn't been extremely efficient lately. He had 19 carries for 63 yards this last week. The snaps continue to be pretty even between the two of them, and Ken Walker obviously saved his fantasy day with 1 big catch for like 65 yards and a touchdown. I think this is basically a 50-50 split in the backfield. There's always obviously just a huge upside for Charbonnet if Kenneth Walker were to go down. So Charbonnet needs to be rostered. He's a guy that could easily be a league winner if there were an injury to Ken Walker. And then Antonio Gibson, I'll mention him, especially in PPR, continues to be utilized by the Commanders. They're a team that's throwing the ball more than any other team in the NFL right now. The running backs were both extremely involved in the passing game. They both caught receiving touchdowns this last week, and we've known that Gibson's a good player. He's a guy that's always been a really good pass catching back, a guy that's actually been a top 12 running back in his career. If anything happened to Brian Robinson, we'd see a massive workload for Antonio Gibson, and he'd be obviously great for fantasy. And then even with Antonio Gibson as the backup to Brian Robinson, he's still a solid option as like a low-end running back 2 in PPR formats. So Gibson's a guy that you can roster for sure and definitely could be played if you need to. And then obviously the upside's there for sure if anything happened to Brian Robinson. Next up, we got the wide receiver position. I'll start things off with Brandon Cooks, who just really broke out this last week, had over 150 receiving yards for the Cowboys, and really this Cowboys team just looks like they're ready to air it out the entire rest of the season. Tony Pollard as a feature back just really hasn't worked out for him so far this season. He's not been a guy that's been very efficient. He just doesn't look good. The Cowboys really don't seem like they can get where they want to go by running the ball as much as they want to, and honestly, they don't need to run the ball that way because Dak Prescott looks great. CeeDee Lamb's playing out of his mind. The way CeeDee Lamb is playing, he's opening up a lot of opportunities for the other pieces, like guys like Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks. And Brandon Cooks is a guy that's proven it before in his career. He clearly still has at least some juice. Playing well. He's a guy that we know is a known commodity, and he's only rostered in about 50% of leagues right now. He's probably rostered in your league, but if he happens to be on the waiver wire, I think he's a guy that you can actually pick up and use as like a wide receiver 3 the rest of the way. Obviously, matchup dependent. You want to play games where he's like going to be necessary to the offense. You don't want any situation where they're going to get up like 40, but we even just saw this last week. They got up like 30 or 40 points and didn't mind just continuing to pass the ball. So I think Brandon Cooks is definitely a guy that needs to be on rosters and can actually be cracking starting lineups on a regular basis if you need him to. Demario Douglas, I'll mention him. Pretty clearly the wide receiver 1 for the New England Patriots at this point. he looks good when he's playing. He's a guy that was obviously playing hurt this last week and still put up 6 for 86. A talented player in an offense that just needs assets that can move the ball. We could see a quarterback change in New England, so I'm not sure exactly how it's going to change the target share. Sometimes different quarterbacks prefer different players, but I don't think Bailey Zappi's too different from Mac Jones. I think we'll continue to see generally the same usage, and Douglas is certainly a guy that can be used as a flex option, and obviously boosted him in PPR formats over non-PPR because of how close he's to the line of scrimmage he's utilized. Noah Brown, he needs to be talked about. 2 straight massive weeks for him. He looks really good. A guy that really seems to have a nice mind meld with CJ Stroud. He's just always the guy that seems to get open and the play breaks down. And CJ Stroud's extended plays, had a really clutch catch and run that really set them up to win the game this last week. I know Nico Collins was inactive, but I sort of think that when Nico Collins comes back, it's just going to put Robert Woods right on the bench. We're going to see the three wide receiver sets be Nico Collins, Noah Brown, and obviously Tank Dell. These 3 guys have clearly established themselves as the best receivers in this roster, and even though they're paying Robert Woods, it would just be silly for them to put Noah Brown back on the bench. So I think Noah Brown's going to be like a low-end flex play the rest of the season. Obviously, it's tough for 3 wide receivers and a tight end and Dalton Schultz, who's involved, to really be high-end, consistent performers in a offense led by a rookie quarterback. But CJ Stroud's no rookie quarterback. They've got a good schedule going forward. CJ Stroud's playing out of his mind. I think Noah Brown absolutely needs to be on rosters and could certainly be a fantasy contributor the rest of the way. Rashid Shaheed, I got to mention him. It's going into the Saints bye week, so it's possible that he's either on waivers now or gets dropped this week as teams need to clear up roster spots for new players. Shaheed's obviously got a shot to be the wide receiver 2 in this offense. We still don't have a whole lot of news on what Michael Thomas's injury looks like, but on top of that, Michael Thomas is sort of dealing with some legal troubles. It sounds like he smashed a guy's car windshield with a brick. We'll see what happens there, but there's a possibility here that Rashid Shaheed ends up being the wide receiver 2 in this offense for a little bit of time, and there's also an opportunity here that Jameis Winston ends up being the quarterback. We saw Derek Carr leave the game with what was supposed to be a shoulder injury and being placed into concussion protocol. We'll see what happens there, but the shoulder injury obviously limited him in the past. I'm not sure at the moment if it's the same shoulder or the other one, but they've obviously got the bye week here, so it's possible that we just see Derek Carr and the offense is back to what it was beforehand, but it's very clear that at least from a fantasy standpoint, this offense is much more lucrative when Jameis Winston's at the helm. He targets his wide receivers downfield more. He's willing to take more risks, and that's just great for all the fantasy pass catchers in this offense. So as a Chris Olave manager basically everywhere, I really hope that Jameis Winston comes back and keeps playing for them. But Shaheed's a guy that's utilized downfield quite a bit as well. He's a talented player, and I think he's a guy that, even with Michael Thomas, has been usable, and he does need to be on rosters for sure. Elijah Moore, I'll mention him. Finally had a good game this last week. Scored a touchdown on a bit of a scramble play by Deshaun Watson. Pretty clearly the wide receiver 2 in Cleveland at this point. Seems like it's Amari Cooper and then Elijah Moore, and then Cedric Tillman was on the field quite a bit but didn't do much with it. They've got a really plus matchup this next week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that does give it up to opposing wide receivers quite a bit. We saw Jaden Reed and Romeo Dobbs both score touchdowns this last week, and honestly, Elijah Moore is a player that he's been talented before in the past. He's obviously a talented enough player, and Deshaun Watson is playing okay lately. This is an offense that obviously isn't fantastic, but Elijah Moore is a good enough player. He's involved enough in the offense that he could certainly be rostered. You could actually probably play him and flex him this week. He's a decent option this week in Week 11. Next up, we got 2 Packers wide receivers, both Romeo Dobbs and Jaden Reed. Both are available in enough leagues that I felt like it was worth mentioning them. Romeo Dobbs just continues to score touchdowns. He's a good player. He's a guy that we're looking to near the red zone, and they're obviously not a team that I expect to be winning a lot of games. So they're probably not going to be able to run the ball the way they want to, and if that's the case, then they're going to probably have to air it out a little bit more, and then we could see some more Romeo Dobbs usage going forward. Jaden Reed, same thing. He's a good player. You could make an argument he's played a lot better than Christian Watson so far this season. I know Christian Watson is one of those players that a lot of people thought really highly of. I wasn't very high on him coming into the offseason, but he's a player that obviously has disappointed a lot of people, and Jaden Reed's kind of a big part of that. Very involved in the offense, maybe a lot more so than people expected coming into the season, but he's a guy that definitely needs to be rostered, and you can definitely flex in different matchups. And then Jalen Guyton, I'll mention him. I could mention Quentin Johnson here as well, who finally found the end zone, but Guyton's a guy that's been involved for this Chargers offense before, a player that's obviously a really high-end deep threat when he's healthy. He's a guy that's had several big plays for the Chargers over the years, and finally coming back into his own, scored a touchdown in this game, looks decent. There's obviously a clear vacancy in this offense for the wide receiver 2 position. Keenan Allen is effectively the entire offense at this point, and Joshua Palmer's still going to miss at least 2 more weeks due to his injury, so in that time, there's an opportunity here for Jalen Guyton to be a guy that you could potentially be looking to start. The Chargers are a team that obviously just can't play defense at all. It's going to be all on Justin Herbert if they want to keep winning games, and he obviously is talented enough to make it work. So Guyton's a guy that if you're in like a really deep league, you could pick up and flex if you want to, and obviously it's a really risky play, but he's a guy that being the deep threat profile he is, he could certainly give you some upside if you want to take that risk there. Except at the tight end position, and I want to just really highlight a guy in Trey McBride, who I've touched on a couple times already, but if he happens to still be available, you absolutely need to prioritize going to get Trey McBride. He just looks legit. It was the first 100-plus receiving yard game for a Cardinals tight end since the 80s. He's a legit option. He's very clearly, potentially, the number one option in Kyler Murray's eyes, and we saw this Cardinals offense just look completely different with Kyler Murray. I got to imagine Kyler Murray was still shaking some rust off as well, but he still came out and performed at a very high level. This offense looked like a competent NFL offense, and if Trey McBride's even the number two option in this offense, it could easily make him a top five tight end the rest of the season. We've seen this be an offense that targets the tight ends a ton over the last several weeks, and Kyler Murray coming back really just made that even more apparent in this offense. He didn't score a touchdown, and he still finished with over 100 receiving yards, caught 9 passes. He's just a good player. He looks like he's going to be potentially one of the next big things at the tight end position. He's a guy that if you're in Dynasty, I'd probably be targeting. I know you're kind of buying high there, but I'm all in on him. I truly believe he's one of those players that can be a difference maker for you guys. I think he's a really talented player with a good quarterback and what should be a good offense that needs to score a lot of points. So I think McBride's a guy that's really going to be a guy that could potentially take your tight end spot and just put a ribbon on it, make it really nice and easy for you the rest of the season. I've got one league where I have Mark Andrews, and I picked up Trey McBride a couple weeks ago anyway. I'm now feeling like I could potentially consider trading Mark Andrews because I really do think Trey McBride's good enough to be similar enough to that level of production. Then if I can get another high-end player for Andrews, I'd certainly consider it. So I think that Trey McBride, even if you have a tight end, just gives you a hell of a lot of flexibility, gives you a lot of options with your roster, and is certainly someone that I want to have. And I also just don't want my league mates to have that are going to get him for free. So definitely put a bid in on him, even if he's available and you don't need a tight end. Next, we got Jake Ferguson, another player that's just very involved with this Cowboys offense. They're throwing it really well right now, and Jake Ferguson looks like he's a good player, so he absolutely needs to be on rosters as well. Luke Musgrave needs to be on rosters too. Not as much so, but he's a guy that's being utilized deep downfield quite a bit. I think he's a talented player. Like I said earlier with the Packers, they're a team that's going to need to pass the ball quite a bit because their defense just really isn't playing that well. They can't stop the run. They're going to be trailing in a lot of games, and Musgrave is a kind of player that as a rookie tight end we could see sort of elevate himself over the back half of the season. Then Logan Thomas, he'll make his weekly appearance here. He just continues to be mediocre every single week, and sometimes that's all you're looking for at the tight end position. So if you just need a weekly streamer, you could certainly do a lot worse than Logan Thomas. It's by no means a bad situation for him, and he's a player that is involved in the offense and a guy that is effectively like the number 3 target in the offense behind McLaurin and Dotson, and he's just a guy that's a consistent safety blanket for Howell and gives you an option and some touchdown upside every single week. So Logan Thomas does need to be on more rosters for sure. And last, but certainly not least, we've got the defensive options here. I'll start things off with the Detroit Lions, who will be my preferred pickup this week. They get to host the Chicago Bears, whether it's going to be Justin Fields or Tyson Bagent. There's just going to be a lot of opportunity for turnovers here. This is a Bears offense that just doesn't look good by any means. I know they've put up a couple high-end performances with Justin Fields, but I'm not going to expect that in his first week back. This is certainly a defense that I'd be looking to prioritize. And with Aiden Hutchinson and how well the defense is playing, I know it was a tough week last week for them against the Chargers, but the Chargers are a different animal than the Chicago Bears. I think you can confidently play the Detroit Lions against the Bears this week. Next, I think the Miami Dolphins are actually a decent option as well. They're coming off of their bye. They play the Las Vegas Raiders, who, let's be honest, I know they've won the last 2 games, but they beat the Jets and the Giants. I'm not exactly believing the Raiders are fixed offensively either. Aiden O'Connell looks fine, but he's a rookie quarterback going up against some elite cornerbacks and a decent pass rush in Miami. I think the Dolphins have got a good shot to put up a good showing next week. If you want to go a little bit riskier, I think the Washington Commanders are a good option as well. They get to host the New York Giants, who obviously just look anemic on offense. Tommy DeVito just doesn't look like he's NFL ready by any means. The only real option at all that the Giants have is to run the ball with Saquon Barkley, and eventually this Commanders offense is going to put up enough points that it gets tough for that team to do it. So the Commanders pass rush obviously isn't there, but they've got decent cornerbacks. They can create some turnovers, and I know, like I said, the pass rush really isn't there for them, but they're going to be a turnover machine with that secondary a little bit, and obviously DeVito's going to help make that happen. So I think the Commanders are a decent option. And then if you want to get even riskier, the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, I know they haven't looked great lately, but they are still a team that has a good pass rush. They should be able to create some turnovers as well. They're really good at punching the ball out, and they play the New York Jets next week. They host them. What really is a must-win game for the Buffalo Bills. They're now 5-5. They really need to win out after losing to the Denver Broncos this week, and the Bills are going to need to turn their season around. I think they'll probably start doing that this next week. So the Bills are set up for a good bit of success here, and I think you've got a good shot at just picking them up and playing them. The one team who's not mentioned here as well, the Cleveland Browns. I know a lot of people potentially dropped them last week after having to host or play the Baltimore Ravens. The Cleveland Browns are a defense that I want to be playing almost regardless of who their opponent is going forward. They create so many turnovers, have such an elite pass rush that you can just pick up and play the Cleveland Browns the entire rest of the way, and I think you'll be pretty set. And then one more who's not listed here as well. The Kansas City Chiefs likely got dropped last week. I know this week they're not a great option because they host the Philadelphia Eagles. It's not a great matchup there, but if you want to look at them the entire rest of the season, I certainly think it's a decent option because they've been elite so far this season, and the schedule does ease up a little bit. After this week, they play the Raiders and then the Packers, 2+ matchups. They'll play the Bills the following week, but then after that, they get the Patriots, Raiders, the Patriots and Raiders in weeks 15 and 16. So the Chiefs could certainly be a defense that you can pick up and play in the first 2 weeks of the fantasy playoffs. Could give you an edge there, and I think the Chiefs are worth sort of looking ahead towards and being a potential option to help you out there as well. So that'll do it for this week's waiver wire video. As always, if you guys have any specific ad drop questions, just let me know in the comments. I love helping you guys get that all set. I love helping you guys get your rosters fine-tuned and help getting you guys set up for the playoffs. So hopefully you guys are in a good spot, whether you're 3-7 or whether you're 9-1, you're still in it. As long as you've got even up to 8 losses, you've still got a shot here. I've made a couple the playoffs in a couple of leagues where I go 6-8, and then you find a way to squeak in. So just keep fighting, get yourself into the playoffs, and then we'll get you set to help win those playoff matchups and hopefully get you that championship this season. So it's been a lot of fun making all these videos. As always, I want to ask you guys to subscribe to the channel if you haven't. We're just over 930 subscribers. I'd love to hit 1,000 by the end of the NFL season. So if you haven't subscribed already, I know a lot of you guys watch these videos and potentially don't even know that you're not subscribed. Just take a look. It helps me and it helps you as well because it'll make sure that you don't miss any content going forward. Up next, we'll get the trade target video where I'll go over players I'm looking to buy low and sell high on. And then we'll start looking a little bit deeper into those playoff matchups as well. Start looking into which players need to be on your rosters or which players you need to let go of if you're in a must-win situation. Obviously, I know a lot of trade deadlines are coming this week, so it could be a big week for you guys to make those decisions. And then obviously Thursday morning, you guys will get the Thursday Night Football primer where I'll go over the Thursday Night Football matchup. And then Saturday morning, you guys will get the video where I'll go over every single matchup this week and get you guys all set to make those start-sit decisions. So if you want access to all that, all you've got to do is subscribe to the channel. It's obviously free. You just got to make sure you don't miss any of it. So really appreciate all the support you guys have been giving. It's been a lot of fun helping the channel grow and all that. And it's just been a really fun ride so far this season. And hopefully we can get you guys some wins going forward and get you guys some championships. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter @RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.